Welcome, welcome. Here we are at another live. So, today we are talking about two ways to handle conflicting advice about your R01. And so, the reason I wanted to talk about this today is this is another question I get all the time. I heard this piece of advice from person A, I heard this other piece of advice from person B, and they conflict with each other. And who should I be listening to? Because that person's pretty senior and that person's pretty senior, and I don't want to go against any advice that I'm getting. What do I do? So I hear this a lot from the women I coach. So let me just quickly introduce myself. If you're new to me, I am Sarah Dobson. I am a research grant consultant and academic career coach. And one of the things I do is I run a program for women faculty who are making the leap from their K award to R01 funding. And this is a context where I hear this question a lot. So I wanted to talk about it today. So really the roadblock is this, right? The grant writing process can be lonely and isolated, and you're spending long hours in front of your laptop. And if you have the bad habit of binge writing your grants at the very last minute, right? You don't have a lot of time to collaborate and discuss with your team, much less with any colleagues who aren't on the grant. Right. And so when you pair that with the anxiety of imposter syndrome that many early career folks experience, that's a whole lot of negative thoughts floating around in your brain without really any outlet for them. Right. So you're essentially writing a grant on your own while also battling all of these inner demons. And it's no wonder that you're exhausted and overwhelmed and stressed. And so even if you are organized enough to pass around your draft to colleagues in advance, whether that's your aims page or even your entire research strategy, even if you are organized enough to do that in advance, your colleagues are really busy too, right? So often what happens is that the best you can hope for is a really brief look over and a really brief comment from your colleague, right? Which doesn't really help at all because you're still worried that your idea isn't any good. And so if you're lucky enough to get more than a looks good from your colleagues, their feedback is based on what they would do and where their research interests lie, right? Rather than assessing what you're trying to accomplish. Okay. And so this is the conundrum that I hear from a lot of the women that I work with. So either they don't get any real feedback or they get too much conflicting feedback, too many voices in their ear about what they should do and how they should do it. Okay. So here's the remedy to this. And the remedy is that you need to start thinking about feedback differently. Okay. And if you're able to think about feedback differently, this is no longer an issue. So in my experience, the way that most early career folks view feedback is they're looking for approval, right? They're not really not really all that interested in feedback. They just want to know that they're on the right track and that they're doing it right instead of getting something that they can use. It's really about just that confirmation that, okay, I'm doing it right. And that's not necessarily bad. It's totally normal. But I encourage you to look at feedback slightly differently, right? So instead of looking for people to tell you that you're on the right track, what you want to be doing, especially if you're moving into a leadership role, right, is you want to approach feedback as a way to get more information and more context to help you make a decision. Okay. So instead of thinking of it as a way to get approval and therefore something that you might even want to shy away from because you're worried that you might not, or you're worried that it's not perfect. If you think of feedback as just another piece of information or another bit of context to help you make decisions about your project, that's where you'll get the most benefit out of feedback, okay? So some feedback will be useful in the sense that it will encourage you to think differently about how you're approaching something, right? And it will allow you to make any necessary adjustments so that your project is more clear, more feasible, more rigorous, right? On the other hand, some feedback will be useful in the sense that you completely disagree with the recommendations from the person who's giving the feedback. And it helps you get more clear on why you're designing the project the way you're designing it. Because if you are disagreeing with the feedback, you have to think about why. Why do you disagree? And so that helps you get more clear and more solid in why you're doing it the way you're doing it. Okay. So what usually happens when you get that second type of feedback is that you disagree with the feedback, and then you think to yourself that it means that you're doing it wrong. You start worrying that, oh my gosh, this person is telling me to do it a totally different way, and is that the right way? But but the bottom line is that there is no right way. There's the way that you choose to do it, and then to justify why you're doing it the way you're doing it, right? That's what grant writing is. It's making decisions and then justifying those to the people who are reading them. So the problem with getting conflicting feedback is that you're asking the wrong people based on the type of feedback that you're looking for, right? This is another real challenge with feedback, particularly conflicting feedback. So here's an example, a personal example for you. So a few years ago, I took a creative writing course just for fun, just as something fun to do, right? And one of the most valuable pieces of advice that I got, the biggest lesson that I learned from that course, was the importance of choosing the readers for your very first draft. Okay, so the instructor explained that the first draft of a creative writing project is like a tiny, delicate little sprout in the ground. So you need to protect and nurture that little sprout so that it can grow. But feedback from the wrong person at that stage of development can just trample that little sprout, and it never makes it past the sprout stage, right? You need to find people who understand what a sprout actually is and what it needs. Those people who trample on sprouts might actually be great for feedback later in the process when the sprout is no longer a sprout and is more robust and can take it. But in the early stages, you need people who understand what a sprout requires to thrive. Okay? And I think that it's exactly the same for research ideas, right? Especially early in your career. You want to make sure that you're sharing your early research ideas, those tiny, delicate little sprouts, with people who understand what those sprouts need to grow and thrive. There are plenty of sprout tramplers in academic spaces who can give you feedback later in the process when your idea is a bit more robust. But those may not be the same people who can help you nurture that idea in the beginning, right? So if you think about feedback in terms of different types at different stages of the process, one of the smartest things you can do early in the process at the idea stage is to find people you can trust to act as your sounding board, right? People who understand how to help you nurture ideas and coax them along rather than trample on them. So this is something that we do really well inside my K to R transition program for women faculty. We act as that supportive sounding board for those ideas to have space to grow and really gain strength. We know the difference between an idea sprout and a fully formed tree, right? So we help you get closer to designing and articulating your research ideas. And I don't just mean the program coaches and editors either. We create an environment where your peers in the program also act as supportive sounding boards. That's the environment that we create, right? Okay, so let's recap those two ways to handle conflicting feedback. So the first is to recognize that feedback isn't a value judgment on you, and it's not a way to gain approval. It's just more information and context for you to use in your decision making. And the solution here is to distinguish between the feedback that you need to act on and make changes with, and feedback that you disagree with that helps you just get more clear on why you're doing what you're doing and helps you articulate that better. Okay? Number two is to recognize that you need different types of feedback at different stages of development of your research. Okay? And the solution here is to seek out the right kind of feedback at the right time. So in the early stages, the solution is to find people you can trust to act as a sounding board for your little idea sprouts to make sure that they have the right kind of environment to grow and to thrive. All right, so let me just check in here and see if there are any questions. Looks like we are good. So we will wrap up for today. So if you found this video helpful, and if you're looking for some support as you make that transition from your K award to your first R01, I run a K to R transition program for women faculty that can help you make that leap successfully. And if you're interested in learning more about the program, I invite you to book a call with me. You can find the link in the video description, and that will send you to an application page. And once you've completed that brief application, you'll be invited to book a call with me, and we can talk about your specific situation. So I look forward to meeting you, and I will see you on the next live.